December 13th, City Council workshop. And I know that we have Councilor Frazier on the phone, right? Do we also have Councilor Collins on the phone? Not yet?
Yes, that's correct. I'm here.
Hi, DJ. And then it looks like, so we're missing Rob Pell and Kurt Collins at the moment. We're going to start off this morning with the discussion on the emergency operations plan. And Emily just walked in. I don't know if she's getting started or.
I'm ready whenever you are.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry to not give you time to settle in here, but.
No, I'm always ready.
Okay.
I did set some slides. Those are available.
We did hand them out, I believe.
Okay.
Did we hand them out?
I'll look in my stack here, Erin.
We can just wing it. Who needs cool slides?
That's why you're in charge of emergency operations, because you're just ready to go, so,
Can you hear me okay?
yes.
All right, perfect. What's your preference, masked or unmasked at the mic?
You can speak unmasked if you like. It's
Okay. I'll stay, I think you can hear me okay. Let me know if not. Essentially what I'm here today to do is orient you to the new county city EOP, Emergency Operations Plan. By no means do you need to feel ready to accept it today. And by no means does this have to be your last orientation to it from me. Happy to come anytime and dig into specific sections if you want. My purpose here today is to let you know that it is completed, give you an overview of what it looks like, answer any questions you might have. So I ran here to get here on time. And then to essentially make sure that you feel comfortable with the way your roles and authorities are outlined. Some of you are very familiar with that type of content, some of you may not be. So I want to make sure that you know that this is a give and take and can be the beginning of a conversation, not the end all be all. There is potentially in your packet a letter of promulgation that you would have the opportunity to sign, as well as the City of Cape Junction will have that same opportunity. The letter of promulgation's purpose is just to, again, state with good faith that you have seen it, you've been oriented to it, you understand the roles, responsibilities, and authorities outlined in it, and that you're willing to take on those roles during an emergency. So, although it's in your packet, you do not need to say you will sign it today. We can schedule with your staff another date. Let's
Just
see here. Yeah, go ahead.
to clarify, I don't think we have that packet, Rick, so you don't, yeah, we just don't have it yet.
That's okay. It'll be a fun surprise. So essentially, the emergency operations plan, for those of you who are familiar with it, is a framework for how response will occur within the different jurisdictions. It was agreed during the last emergency operations plan that the City of Grants Pass have its own annex that spoke specifically to some responsibilities and approaches and jurisdictional items that were just for you guys. And so we did that. That has been carried over into this newest version, which you will have an opportunity to see. Last week I had dropped off a physical printed version of the EOP, as well as a thumb drive with digital copies, so that at your leisure, whenever you had opportunity, aside from the sections I gave you, pulled out specifically, you could thumb through and get oriented to the whole thing. Now, there are a couple significant differences. For those of you who may have seen or passed by a dusty binder on a shelf labeled Emergency Operations Plan from several years ago, it was quite large. It was about Homesteader's Bible size, and maybe 2 people had read it completely. And that's not a useful document to me. So we worked with the consultant contractor and the staff. We got input from your staff over the last 2 years that was folded in specifically to City of Grants Pass items, and then worked with county separately. I asked the contractor to have a new approach and basically strip out as much extraneous information as we could and say, if you were new to your roller position and all you really cared about was what your department or your authority had to do in an emergency, I want each section to stand alone. And you could just pull it and be like, these are my 5 or 7 pages. And then if you wanted to, you could see yourself within the greater context and get to know the other sections. So your pullable sections as mayor, city council, and supporting staff within the main base plan of the EOP is section 3.0, called Jurisdictional Authority and Emergency Powers. And that talks to you as commissioners, city councilors, mayors, city managers. So if you read nothing else, I'll advise all of you within the base plan when you get a chance to skim through section 3. In addition, you would probably have interest in just skimming through the Grants Pass Annex. And then if you never looked at anything else, that would probably be perfectly reasonable. Your staff within the City of Grants Pass are going to have a deeper dive into their emergency operation roles and responsibilities on the 20th of December. And that's when we'll go into more of who's primary and who's supporting within your departments. So there are sections about response partners broken up by emergency support function that, again, if you choose to, or you have a special relationship with it or interest in a specific department within the city, you can see where they would fall, either as a supporting function, a primary response function, and for what purpose. So those pieces are in there as well. What else is good for you to know? I had a conversation last week when the Board of Commissioners went ahead and accepted and approved adoption of this county plan, that I felt that the base plan without the annexes and appendixes could and should be made available to the public. The general public has never seen the Josephine County EOP. In the past, there were security concerns, and so it was held for internal viewing and use only. All the security concern information has been stripped out. There are no maps, there's no blueprints, there's no codes or people's private information. That information could be included within the annexes if you decided to. And so I suggested that we just cut out the base plan and make that hostable on my county emergency management website pages. They agreed to do that, so we're gonna work towards that. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that, and that for your comfort, you knew that the Grants Pass Annex falls within the annexes and appendices that will not be public. Now there's nothing, again, there's no critically sensitive information in your annex. You can choose to do with it if you want to make it public, you can. But typically in the annexes and appendices is where you would put not necessarily critically sensitive information, but more you'll see EOC rosters with team members' names and information, or references to where a blueprint might be. The physical blueprint might not be in that binder, but there might be a reference to it, for example. So I'll leave that up to you to decide, but know that that appendix that is just for you guys will still be held for internal viewing, at least at the county level. What else? It's prettier, it's more colorful. In terms of trying to make it more readable and accessible, I also worked with the contractor to take the 15 emergency support functions, which are, if you're not familiar with them, I'll just read them off quickly. Transportation and engineering, communications, public works, fire services, hazmat, emergency planning, mass care and shelter, logistics management, public health and medical services, search and rescue, hazardous materials, agriculture and natural resources, energy and utilities, public safety and security, business and recovery, public information and external affairs. So those are the 15 common at both local, state, and federal levels, what we call response functions or support functions. What that means is during an emergency, any one or more of these support functions could be activated, typically under an EOC, or it could be an incident management team by yourself, by your emergency management staff, by your partners. And so, for example, if we take a look at City of Grants Pass, and we say, we're gonna have to activate due to what this incident is within your jurisdiction alone. Let's say it's something that's not impacting the county. Transportation and engineering, ESF1, you would have your reference as to who in your staff and departments would take the primary and support roles. And then there's a crosswalk to see if your EOC was activated, how they would look, where they would fall within the ICS structure of your EOC, and then who your complementary partners would be at the county level, at the community level, and at the City of Cave Junction level if there was a need to interact during an emergency. So those pieces are in there as well. What else can I tell you? What we did that was specifically new visually is we took those 15 support functions and aligned them into 4 primary categories. And those are more the administrative, the emergency services, the infrastructure services, and the health and medical. So again, you don't have to know all 15, you just kind of have to know where you lump within one of those 4 and just focus on those 4 within your realm. Any questions so far? Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm more familiar with the ICS system, and I don't have your documents in front of me, but so finances is an important part, because if you can't pay for things, you don't get them done. And I didn't hear that as one of your 15 areas.
So ICS is a little bit different than ESF. So it is true that most of our local response partners, particularly ones that are familiar with fire or law enforcement, know ICS very well. And so within this EOP, there is a crosswalk. So if you're within an ESF, it crosswalks you to where you would land within an ICS structure. So finance is more really under that emergency planning. So there's an ESF function called emergency planning, which is more the administrative functions that crosswalks to more the planning and administrative side of an ICS organization, and then finance would fall underneath that. They may or may not be activated depending on, the scale or need of the event.
Right.
But within the EOP, both at the city level and the county level, I've given you example pull-out charts, so you can see where you would sit within ICS and ESF if all branches were activated. And then I had highlighted some that are more commonly activated for smaller emergencies.
Okay. And
So
I apologize for our audience. Incident Command System is ICS, and
Yes.
it's a nationwide adopted multi-agency
Yes,
framework local, state, and federal governments use to treat emergencies.
perfect.
Okay, so with that then, in your operating plan, do you have a joint command with liaisons from the different levels of government and private industry, or public organizations?
So joint command is briefly addressed, MAC groups are briefly addressed, lines of succession are briefly addressed, and I would point you to your individual section to look at those. But yes, there's information on there.
So then is there also then with that the designation of organizational liaisons? So the city has a liaison to the incident command team, or and the county does too, and you have just one commander that coordinates all resources, and he or she then has these 2 liaisons that help them implement the emergency operations?
Depends on the scale and type of the emergency and whether or not your EOC is activated. So you could have an incident occurring in the field where you just have an incident management team and an incident commander
Sure.
operating in the field, and they have an ICP or incident command post, right? And they may request and would likely request some liaisons from partners and agencies, maybe city council, to help feed and cross-share information from that command post in the field. Generally, if the incident is severe enough to necessitate an incident command post, you probably are partially or fully activating an EOC. Again, depending on who has jurisdictional lead on the incident, it's either the city EOC, the county EOC, or both to support each other if it's very large. And within the EOC often has its own liaisons. So there needs to be a liaison that feeds information from the command post in the field to the Emergency Operations Center, as well as between persons like yourselves. And so in the EOP, and particularly in Section 3, Jurisdictional Authority and Emergency Powers, it does reference that and give very, basic orientational guidance on typical roles for mayor, city council, city staff. And being a liaison is one of those, although there are others.
Right, well, there would be a designated liaison that would have the authority to speak for the city. You don't want 9 people directing what's going on there. You want that one person having the ear of the 9 people carried forward in an emergency because you need to get things done.
Correct, and so how that would usually work or should work is, depending who the requesting authority is, whether that's the incident commander or the EOC manager, would say, perhaps even the city manager, depends, would say, I need a liaison assigned from city council, and so you would get together and you would designate amongst yourselves at the time who you thought was most appropriate and available. There is no one person or position named out for that because, again, it could be during Christmas break and half of you are gone, or, you just don't know. But the guidance is there to help you think through that process.
Right. So one of the things I thought about was, you want to think big because you can always handle the smaller stuff. So like a regional earthquake, different things that would activate it, and the different jurisdictions that could activate it, and then have a multi-agency command. So as you put this together, what resources did you use and what experienced folks did you use to help you put it together? Because there's been a lot of emergencies and a lot of work done in the past so that we didn't reinvent the wheel. And then if we have any comments, once we do see it, do we send those to you directly, or how do we forward you that?
Those are great questions. So again, an emergency operations plan is intended or strongly encouraged at the state level to be renewed or updated or at least revisited every 3 years. So we were on our 3-year cycle. Our last one was about 2017, and we were on schedule anyhow. We started the process almost a year and a half ago, and we did sit down with many of your staff, and they spent hours laboriously striking sections. I don't agree with this doesn't matter anymore, our structure has changed, things like that. So a lot of that had been culled from your staff, and a similar process was done with the county. Now, I will say your staff and the county staff have endured so much the last 2 years that they probably don't remember what they said or what they reviewed. But it is in there, and that's part of the reason of the one-on-one and group orientations, because if there is something we missed or something that has changed even in the last month, we still have the opportunity to capture it. So in terms of your question about the edits, the adoption has been approved and finalized at the commissioner's level for the full EOP. What that means, though, is that you can still provide minor edits. It just means that the time for major structural updates and edits is over. Unless we all came to an agreement that before the next 3 years we needed significant structural changes. But there is a chart at the beginning of the EOP that will allow me to update any edits that are captured. So for example, you'll see we're at version 2, because there was a minor edit that was going to be made to this final base plan. So if you came back to me or after our orientation with the staff on the 20th and they said, and I am expecting this change. I said, the City of Public Safety isn't called that anymore. Grants Pass Public Safety isn't called that anymore. Well, it was when we went to print a couple of months ago. So that's a minor, very minor edit. So you would let me know about it, I would chart it, make all those minor edits, and then push back out the revised version.
So the last question I had is who activates the emergency action and the committee? Who is responsible? Who is the county official, city official? Can they activate it?
There is
Who-
just like there's a line of succession call down for
Correct.
your city, City of Cape Junction, and the county, there is an activation call down lined out, and I would encourage you guys to look at that. Essentially, within the city jurisdiction, it's typically gonna be city manager, city emergency manager, mayor council decision, chief of police, chief of fire rescue. Those are the typical ones, because they are usually the ones first getting involved and getting a sense of the scope
So
of the
the
need.
city then can unilaterally activate it, but it wouldn't be a multi-agency team at that point in time unless the county would also join in and it was a county-city problem.
Depends on what you're asking and looking for, but yeah, certainly there are circumstances where it would be an internal focus only, and then you would decide whether or not you had exceeded all your local resources, whether you needed to activate mutual aid, which happens a lot anyway, for car accidents, all kinds of things, or whether you needed to go to the county to have the county ask the state for a resource that neither you or the county had. And as a reminder, hopefully in your packet, or at least certainly within the plan, there are a couple examples of declarations and activation templates to help you work through that.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to the document, and I have it here on my desk, and I'll pay specific attention to the finances, because there's nothing worse than having an emergency and you got everybody there to do it, and then you can't pay any contractors to do anything. So I look forward to that.
Understood. So I know that you still have some review time. Know that at some point I'll be circling back around with your admin staff to ask when you might feel comfortable and ready to sign the letter of promulgation. And if you say to them that you're not comfortable or ready, then I would want to come back and schedule either a workshop time or time with you to get a sense of what further did you need to know to get us there. And then if you had edits, you can send them directly to me or through your staff, however you feel comfortable. I will say I will probably hold on making any of those edits until after we've met with the staff, because the staff are really going to be the primary users of the meat of these roles and responsibilities. So I will just kind of lump all the feedback together.
And thank you for compiling it.
Yeah, of course. I know there was a lot I just lobbed at you. Any other questions?
Valerie has a question.
Yeah, I actually have a question, and you're right, there's a lot, but we're excited because we have been waiting for it, so it's nice to see it complete. It's nice to see it in front of us. Looking at the upcoming agenda, you are back on for January 10th, emergency declaration and process. Is that what we're aiming for, is to give you, or is that something different?
So it's complementary, because that's a section that's addressed in there. If you want to adjust that, I'm happy to. It was just a topic that has come up before, and I know you guys are busy all the time. I shouldn't say guys, I apologize. I know Mayor Council is very busy all the time. So that was just the first opening that we had, but we can, if you want to talk about a different topic, we can.
So one of the things that Emily and I talked about was within the plan, the big plan itself, there are certain responsibilities for staff, for city manager, for elected officials, and we wanted to potentially utilize some of that time to have a discussion with you as a council, as a policy board. What are your responsibilities when it comes to emergency, and what role would you play associated with that? So hopefully that workshop would help bring out some of that, and you can have that discussion so we have a good understanding, so you have a good understanding what your role is in emergency.
And I guess my question is this what we need to read and give edits and look at between now and then? I guess is what I'm trying to say.
That would be perfect timing.
Because we do
yeah.
have time off.
That
I
would
mean,
be
holidays, what else will we
perfect
do, right?
Yeah, and you know,
But no,
while
I
you're
think it's good.
staring at the Christmas tree, sipping down your hot cocoa, getting all cozy with your EOP. That sounds,
Sounds wonderful. Thank you. I just
Sounds
wanted
great.
that clarified.
anything else I can provide for you at this point?
Okay, any other questions? Val, go ahead.
I just had a question, and this goes back to, there's been several times we've talked about evacuation plans and that sort of thing, and I'm just kind of wondering where that is in all of this. Whether, I mean, we had talked about the fact that it was better in a sense not to have them than to have them, but it's just been there, and so I was just wondering what the status of
Can we
that was.
address that? Yeah, I understood, yeah. And I thank you for reminding me, because that was something I wanted to update you on. So when I gave my presentation earlier, and thank you for remembering it, quite a while ago now, about evacuation zoning and mapping, I was very careful to lay out for you the pros and the cons. And I was pretty honest that there were a lot of hesitations and concerns I had, particularly when you start to roll on evacuation zones to the public. What I didn't want is for them to feel like that was gonna be the thing, that like, I am in an evacuation zone, I know my zone, I don't even have to think about anything else or do any more personal preparedness. So I was hesitant. I said if you were gonna move forward at the Grants Pass level, we needed to have a lot of community education and things. I have grudgingly accepted that evacuation zoning and zone haven is a thing. I watched it a lot down in California. It's expanding rapidly. Zone Haven is not the only company doing it, but they are basically the Esri, the Google of evacuation zoning. It's a very slick product. It's beautiful. It looks nice. It's expensive, but it works good. And there are the two pilot counties, Jackson and Deschutes in Oregon, who are currently going through a zone haven mapping project, as I think you remember. I see it coming down the road, and I didn't want to wait. So I had some conversations with your law enforcement and fire folks and some of your other staff, and we decided we would be best served to just move forward. And keeping all the pros and cons and education to come in place. So because it takes time, I have now had 4 mapping, we might have had our 5th, 4 for sure, mapping meetings, doodle drawing sessions, we called them, with some of your staff primarily focusing on law enforcement and fire, although Public Works was present at the first 2, with heavy support from your GIS, your much beleaguered but awesome GIS staff. This is sort of as a pop-up side project that they weren't planning on, but they've been very supportive. And then we have had 2 complimentary sit-down sessions, myself and the county GIS and your city GIS, to work on any of those potential evacuation zones within your city jurisdiction that are inevitably going to bleed out into counties. So if you think about certain driveways, half of them are in your jurisdiction if they were to be evacuated, and half of them are in the county. Well, it doesn't really make sense to say we're going to cut the line here and we're only going to evacuate and notice the lower half of that driveway because of the jurisdiction. So we have some preliminary sketched examples with county and city GIS sitting down together of what that would look like within the zoning and mapping and alerting process. In my conversations with your lead LE and fire, we've decided we would just want to continue to keep chipping away at it. We're not quite ready to bring to you a draft product to look at, but probably by January or February at the latest, there would be a draft product that I could help present along with them to you so that you get a sense of it. The plan is if and when your new fire chief gets here, we won't make any final decisions until they get to have some input, because depending on what their background is, they may want to weigh in a lot or a little. And then on the parallel track through my IGA with the City of Grants Pass, I will be utilizing our education and outreach staff, my staff of 1, who's basically like an army of 10, Ricky Perrin, to begin stepping along, building the public education and outreach piece so that we are kind of on track to be rolling those out by early to mid-spring at the latest. So that's where we're at. You'll have visuals soon, but that's the amount of time we've put into it so far.
Thank you. That's good to
Yes.
hear.
Other questions?
I should say, mention, because you may have noticed, I did ask for ARPA funds for two things on the county side. You have your own ARPA funds. I requested, and I believe, it looks like I will receive a chunk of money, small chunk of money, about $55,000 for a one-year pilot contract with Zone Haven for the county jurisdiction. If I get that, and that contract is awarded and we do work with Zone Haven, we will work to incorporate any of your zone mapping that has happened into that product. So if you hear about the county moving forward with Zone Haven or me moving forward, I haven't forgotten. My intent is, depending on how the contract goes, either, well, we will make them mesh either way. I just was concerned to wait because that alone could be a 2-year process and I didn't want to wait till that contract happened. So one way or another, we're just going to keep working away at yours.
Thank you. It sounds like you're actually moving pretty quickly on that.
We're trying, we have an ambitious goal to, when I say we, me and your key staff, to have it ready by this fire season. We all agreed that that may not happen, but if we keep that goal in mind and that pace in mind, we can decide come May if we're prepared to do that, because there's work with your 911 dispatch and other things that also need to happen in terms of using those as alerting and warning zones, but that's the current pace.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, well, thanks for, Joel has something.
And I depend on Vanessa's input on this too. So if my understanding is you're going to get a grant to do the escape routes and the computerized modeling, is that what you're doing?
I asked for two things, and they're separate in my mind. One is Zone Haven, which is just the physical mapping of the Know Your Zone approach. And then I had asked for a separate grant, which also looks like it might be awarded for more the infrastructure analysis, which is what you're talking about, the alternate routes, and looking at those. That's a whole different project. They're complementary, but.
So I was wondering, before that grant is awarded, it might be good to have it be multi-jurisdictional and be cheaper for both of us, rather than just do half, and then if the city does their half and all of a sudden you have to redo yours. So to go slow to go fast and have it multi-jurisdictional rather than just the county. I don't know if that makes sense or not. It's just a question.
I will never turn down money to support some of my projects.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that I got a check in my back pocket, but I
But
needed
yes.
to ask the question.
Yes, so those project pots have been tentatively approved, and we can have more conversation if it looks.
Okay, because it might make, I mean, to do that and stop at the line, like you say, probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, and we wouldn't, but what we would be doing is mostly your public works staff would be donating their time essentially to give input within the city jurisdiction. But if you want to support that, we can talk about that.
Brian has a question.
Oh, well, she actually just answered. I was going to see if, as part of the county, the city would be included in that plan, and it sounds like that we are, so thanks.
Correct, yeah. But again, if you want to. No, yeah, but yeah, you would be included anyways, yes.
We go to Uncle Joel when we want extra money.
Uncle Joel.
All right, I think we have tapped out of questions today, but thank you for the presentation. We'll look through all this materials and we'll meet with you early next year.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. All right, next up, water treatment plant.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. It is. There we go. Got rid of that toolbar at the top. It's great to be here to provide an update on the water treatment plant project for you. Where we're at with phase 1A status, that's technology selection, some potential budget constraints, more than potential budget constraints, and some project options. The relationship to your council goals are maintain, operate, and expand our infrastructure to meet the community's needs. So a little bit of background. On September 15th of 21, the City Council unanimously approved Phase 1A services with Sladen and Carollo, and that was to begin the technology selection process for the replacement water treatment plant. Phase 1B services would be considered at a future meeting, and that would include the full design services as well as value engineering to ensure a best value project. You would then also consider a guaranteed maximum price at a later date, and that is after the full design has been done and the actual cost would be known of what the future water treatment plant would cost. So during phase 1A, the technology selection portion, there were 3 workshops that were scheduled. And in those 3 workshops were to define all the parameters that would need to be incorporated into that new water treatment plant. A couple of those that I wanted to point out were, we wanted to focus on plant capacity. How big? We've been saying 22.5 million gallons. That's our capacity that was in the design spec. But is that the capacity that we actually needed, or can we make that smaller in order to save a little bit of money? We also wanted to look at what rate that water needed to be pumped at different times of the year, and then what hours of operation would be incorporated into that plant. Would it run 24 hours a day, or would we run in a start-stop mode like we do today? We wanted to look at if there were any operator requirements. How much operation space did we need in the control room? How much room do we need around various pumps for servicing and chemical feed systems? How big are clear wells? How big number of pumps? Do we want always to have a full redundancy requirement, or do we want one on the shelf so that we can swap something out? We also talked about water quality goals. And I know that sounds kind of silly when we're talking about building a water plant, but how clean is clean enough? Do we want to go ahead and back that down and still be well under the federal guidelines, but maybe not as clean as we get today? We also wanted to look at that from a perspective, though, of what we think might be coming down the pipeline in the future. We don't want to build a plant today that's barely meeting regulation, knowing that in the future those regulations could change. So some of the outcomes from treatment plant workshop or treatment selection workshop 1 included plant sizing. We have been saying since day one, 22.5 million gallons per day, and that's the capacity that we are planning on designing into your new treatment plant. But we are looking now at 22.5 million gallons per day peak capacity and a 20 million gallon per day firm capacity. And I want to explain the difference so that it's very clear. A firm capacity is the capacity that the plant can run at 24 hours a day with its very largest pieces of equipment out of service. So that means under almost any conceivable condition, we can produce 20 million gallons per day. The peak capacity is a capacity that it can run at almost indefinitely until you have a large piece of equipment fail, and then it is no longer able to run at that capacity. However, then you'll be able to run at 20 million gallons per day. It would have a firm capacity of 10 million gallons per day in the winter, and I'll talk about that here in just a second of why that's important. 24-hour-a-day operation unattended was a very high desirability by the city of Grants Pass, as it gave us more flexibility to potentially forestall staff additions in the future. We talked about redundancy requirements. On very key pieces of equipment, an installed redundant unit was important, but on less key pieces of equipment, say a chemical feed pump, having one on the shelf made more sense than having installed units, which again saves money. We talked about chemical types and storage volume requirements. So that is trying to balance how many chemicals and what volumes we store. The reason you would consider storing more would be to reduce the time in between chemical deliveries. But by doing so, you have to increase your building size, increase your storage, and your capacity of your emergency overflow capacity, secondary containment. That word was not coming to me. We also looked at whether or not we could leave portions of the remaining operation at the current site. Maybe we could do stuff like pre-sedimentation at the existing water treatment plant, and in addition to leaving the intake structure there. And then also looking at treatment techniques which would combat future water quality concerns. I will tell you that the 20 million gallon per day firm capacity had me very nervous. One of the things that we have been saying all along is we need to make sure that we have enough capacity to take us through the entire debt service window. I did not, or whoever follows me, should not be back in front of you before you've paid off this upgrade saying, oh, by the way, we need to make more capacity. So we ran a lot of numbers. And what you can see in these two graphs, and they're included in your packet and they're a little bit more visible, we have a peak day and a peak week. Oftentimes we design to a peak day, but a peak day is literally 1 day out of 365, and you have a lot of storage. And what that means is that while yes, you did produce 14 or 15 million gallons that day, when you looked at the week, you really only produced 8 million gallons per day. And that is a really important thing. And what that allows you to do is design a plant that it's a little bit smaller, and then you rely on your distribution storage, and you're able to produce that water over a longer period without getting into too much trouble. Now, what we want to watch out for, though, is when you start getting too many of those peak days in a row, that's when we'll get into trouble. In looking at this data, though, what it clearly shows is that during a peak week, you won't get anywhere near the capacity of the treatment plant in that 30-year debt service window. That's the key factor. So during treatment selection workshop 2, which was held on November 9th, we were to select up to 4 treatment trains to fully price those and bring them before you for consideration. And that was what we were hoping we were going to be doing today. The team worked with an interactive pricing worksheet to examine both conventional and membrane options. We also considered technologies that we'd already looked at and kind of discarded, such as ballasted flocculation. Again, trying to make sure that we had the best value plant moving forward. Also during that workshop, we looked at non-economic evaluation criteria. Dollars and cents are very important, but there might be other reasons that you might want to consider a technology. Those items, and we won't be talking about them today, but we will be at a future meeting, would include things like energy intensity. Energy intensity does come down to dollars, but it might be something that you want to invest in a technology that is much less energy intensive. Operator and public safety, so how safe is that plant to operate for the operators and how safe is it for the public to work around? Flexibility of the processes to combat future regulations, that's a very high one on our list. And then we dug into those various treatment trains. As you recall from many of our previous processes, and I'm just going to walk you through this super fast. We have the Rogue River with the intake pumps. These are going to remain at the treatment plant. We then come in during a conventional treatment to where we inject our chemicals, and then we have flocculation basins and sedimentation basins, very similar to what we have today. That was intended to be followed by intermediate ozonation and mixed media filters, followed by, or potentially followed by, ultraviolet disinfection, finished water storage, and then high service pumps. And we looked at potential layouts. And I included in your guys' handouts some details of what if this includes a little bit more with a more detailed layout plan. And what we can see when we look at our layouts, you can see dashed lines in all of those drawings. And what that is looking at is, this is our initial capacity, our 22.5 million gallons per day peak capacity. The dashed lines represent what has to be added in the future to get to that peak capacity. I will note that off screen, you can just barely see it down here in the corner. There is more infrastructure. I wasn't able to cram all of the details into the slides to make them apparent, but there's a lot more infrastructure that does get built, but that's been taken into consideration in all of these. And what you see on this is where we have basins here for settling out the solids. So these are our sludge handling facilities. When we expand, we'll have to move to a mechanical dewatering facility as opposed to a passive technology. And then we also looked at several trains that were related to membrane technology, both with and without pretreatment, ceramic membranes, polymeric membranes, fairly complex order of operations. One of the things we have learned over the pilot work, which we have been doing with Paul now for the last, maybe 8-10 months, pretreatment is going to be a must if we do membranes that are non-ceramic. Ceramic will handle the higher solids loading as well as the coarse sand that we tend to get. But what we found is that pretreatment will greatly increase membrane life and treatability. So that would be included potentially in a future membrane option. And a membrane option future. I will note that I think the drawing that I put in the packet actually shows the expansion. This particular one doesn't show, but there would be another train to the north to double the capacity of this treatment plant. And then we started looking at the pricing of those options. And this is where we started to run into problems. We set a target for the designer and the contractor that the construction, design and treatment costs, or design and construction costs of the replacement treatment plant could not exceed $65 million. And as you can see, the conventional treatment plant option that we showed earlier exceeds it by $2 million. This is an important number because this is a preliminary design number. It has not been designed. This number could be higher or lower when we got finally to the end, which is why we wanted to get in front of you today. I didn't want to go through the entire design process, get all the way to the end, and we didn't have enough money. We want to make that decision today and or within the next few weeks, but not spend a lot of time designing something that we're not going to be able to afford, or that I have to put in front of you at the very last minute and ask for more money when we're out there digging holes in the ground. And that, I didn't want to do that to you. So we also looked at a membrane option, and as you can see that one was significantly higher. And both of these options did not include key technologies that we thought should be included, including things like ozone or pretreatment. In their costs for membranes, pretreatment for membranes, ozone for conventional treatment, which would greatly improve water quality as well as future-proof us from future constituents. So what are the budget implications? So Project WA 6207 has a budget of $81 million. That is the published budget in the budget book. It is the number that we have been sticking to since day one when that budget was created in 2015. We had an estimated debt offering of $56.1 million in that original projection, and the rate structure adopted by council in 2018 supported that debt. It allows us to budget $2 million per year in capital construction, as well as supporting current O&M costs, allowing for a couple % per year increase, and supports the debt service on that $56.1 million. That was at an estimated rate of about 3.5%, and a debt service payment of just over $3,050,000 per year. I did want to take a minute and note, we created that budget in 2015, right as we were going into the rate study, because that's one of the key factors in determining that rate is what do you think you're going to be taking on in debt service. Since that time, ENR, which is the Engineering News Record, they tracked construction costs across the whole United States. They have published that construction costs have increased by 23% since that number was published. So we have spent $7.1 million to date. That includes property acquisition of $4.78 million, relocation expenses of $258,000, and quite a bit of preliminary work dating back all the way to 2016 to support the rate study, as well as early work with council on delivery method, creating and publishing the RFP. It's been a fairly extensive amount of work. Looking at anticipated future expenses, we believe that we'll have approximately $4 million in construction oversight and special inspections. We believe internally we'll have about $1.7 million in charges. Some of that we can probably reduce, but that's typical in our projects when we look at our percentages. We are carrying absolutely zero owner's reserve. What that means is we have no contingency for us in that budget. There is some built into the budget, don't get me wrong, but we have not reserved any money in our budget. And then we are estimating that that leaves about $68 million in cash for the completion of the project. So solutions. I'm not going to come before you without bringing you some solutions. On November 3rd, you did authorize us to pursue a Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities BRIC grant for pipeline and infrastructure work. So in the process of applying for that, the pipeline was removed from that grant application. And let me tell you why. And it makes perfect sense when you hear it explained back to you. One of our consultants actually was a FEMA employee for years, and he worked on the other side evaluating grant applications from cities like us. And what how he expressed it is, okay, you're asking to build this or retrofit this existing infrastructure that you're feeding your water plant and to put this new water line in and connect it to a piece of property. Because there's not a water plant on that piece of property. We haven't finished designing a water plant on that piece of property. And it's not like when we finish that grant, right, and the water plant or the pipeline is done, that it actually is going to plug into anything. And so it really is kind of what they would look at as a stranded asset. If the plant was already done and we were getting a grant for the intake structure and the pipeline, they would look at that and go, oh, yep, perfect. It completes it, we flip the switch and we turn it on and off you go. But because the other piece had not been done, it was not going to be looked on very favorably. So working alongside the consultant, in addition to State Office of Emergency Management, they actually felt that the entire project was a better, more grant-worthy option. And so we have expanded the application and we'll be applying for up to $50 million in BRIC funds, which is the maximum amount that they award. We have a very strong and compelling story for this application, and that's what I want to stress to you. The existing water treatment plant is within the 100-year flood. The BRIC program is designed to move infrastructure that is vulnerable to disaster to safer locales. The new location is out of the 500-year floodplain, so that's a huge plus for our application. The existing water treatment plant is extremely vulnerable to a seismic event. Again, BRIC is designed to make infrastructure needed to respond to a widespread emergency much more resilient. Every time we said this is what the grants are for, we kept checking the boxes more and more and more. The other thing that we have going for us is the water filtration plant is the only source of water for Grants Pass, and there is no potential for interties and no potential for groundwater development. It's really important to note that we are also very committed as a community. The City Council has reaffirmed time after time again by passing multiple resolutions for property acquisitions, for rates, for bringing this project with our contractor forward, that also is very, very favorable to the application process. The federal government loves to spend money when they know it's going to be used right away. And we are literally out there with shovels in hand ready to go to work. So that also makes this a very likely option. But I don't want to kid you. This is a competitive grant application. We may not be awarded this grant. So this really needs to be kind of our backup plan. In fiscal year 2020, though, and you remember when we talked about this previously, they awarded 22 grants ranging in value from about $1.25 million up to the $50 million max. Projects, again, focused on protecting large and small community infrastructure, and ensuring the continuity of vital services. What I wanted to focus on this, though, in this fiscal year, they are giving out over $919 million in BRIC funding. During that previous year, they only gave out $500 million. So again, this makes it our grant application more likely to be awarded some amount. as I knock on wood. So solution 2 is the Infrastructure Investments and Job Acts. After the Biden administration passed this act, I got on the phone and started calling everybody I could think of to find out when this money is going to be released, what impact it could have to our project. And connected with several folks at Business Oregon. And we had talked with Business Oregon quite a few years ago when we were looking at all of our water plant funding, and we actually eliminated this as a potential funding source for a couple of reasons. At that time, the interest rates weren't as competitive as we could get on the open market, and the amount of dollars that they could loan us were not enough to make it worthwhile to trigger the federal requirements for reporting. However, recent conversations, and with the amount of money that Oregon is looking at receiving over the next 5 years, which is well over $500 million in the next 5 years, they have mentioned that Grants Pass is likely eligible for loans at 1% interest rates, and we're going to show what that means or potentially means. And potentially all the way up to the full amount. They did not bat an eye when I told them how much we might want to borrow. And previously they were very small amounts, $10 million or less. And now they're saying that they might be willing to loan us the full amount at the 1%. So I think that that is really a telling thing. And what does that mean? So if we look at the loan repayment here on $56.1 million at 3.5%, over the 30 years, we are going to pay $100,000 in principal and over $35,400,000 in interest. That's a very large number, and that gives us a debt service payment of just over $3,050,000. We could borrow up to $76 million at 1%, have an interest, a loan payment that is lower, pay back that full amount, and only $12 million in interest, $345,000, and pay that back over the 30 years. We'd still be less, $3 million less over that full life cycle of the loan. It does give you some options, but definitely we would be paying much, much less in interest. So at this point, we would recommend that we pursue a few more dollars in state revolving loan fund, potentially up to the full $76 million. That would allow us to come back to you with 2 fully developed treatment plant options that meet the community's needs today and well into the future. It would at least provide an option. Today, we can afford one option, which is a conventional treatment plant exactly like we have today. With no modifications, essentially. It's just a little bit more modern that would last a long time, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't add any additional treatment that we're not doing today. It is also recommended that we continue to pursue additional funding through grants. Definitely the BRIC grant, we want to continue that. We are also continually looking for additional grants that would help to do this. If we were able to do both of these, the BRIC program would allow us to borrow far less. That means that our debt service payment would be far lower, which would mean that we could lower the water rate in the future once we have that all settled down. And with that, I'm just going to open it up to questions. I did want to mention we have a wealth of expertise in the audience today to answer your questions. Dick Talley, Wayne Gresh, and Steve Flett. We have worked together on this. We've been beating our heads up a lot. I said to you from day one, we are not raising this budget. And we got to the point when we were doing this workshop and we could not get the treatment stripped far enough to fit the budget. That was a bad feeling for me. And I called Steve up and I made it a bad feeling for him because I said, I need you to stop work until we can figure out how to fund this project. And he was very gracious, and we've worked together very, very hard, and we've done some phone calls and we've done some amazing work. So with that, I'm now available for any questions that you have.
DJ on the phone has our first question. Go ahead, DJ.
Thank you, Jason. That's a great, thorough presentation. Would you mind elaborating a little bit more on the hopeful key features for the treatment plants? And do you have an estimated cost of implementing those key features for increased water quality and anticipated future regulation? And then a follow-up question to that would be, are these features that can be added later in the process after we have a functioning plant?
Yeah.
And if so, is there a cost benefit otherwise to doing it now versus later?
Sorry, I'm writing all those things down because that was a lot of questions. So the first answer is...
I'm happy to clarify any part of it.
I appreciate that. Yes, any of these technologies that we would ideally add today can be added in the future. And yes, they will always come at a higher cost in the future because you're going to pay an additional MOB, and as we move forward in time, things just get more expensive, kind of like what we've been talking about since day one, as we've been losing value every day. What we really need to add, I feel, to this initial offering is ozone, if we're doing conventional treatment, because that has the potential to take care of algal toxins, which we know are going to become a bigger issue on the Rogue Basin, and numerous other future contaminants of concern. We would consider leaving UV in, or at least making provisions for it, again, because it provides for a higher level of disinfection. That would take our cost, we believe, from 67 million constructed, as you can see on the chart behind me. We would add, I'm going to hopefully have my pointer on still, hang on. And I have completely, there it is. We would add these two lines, which is the ozone generation at 11.5 million and ozone contactor at 2.7 million. Now, again, those can be added in the future, and we can make provisions in today's plant to make that connection easier and more inexpensive in the future. On the membrane side, we really would need to mend, we would swap out, this one would be a much more inexpensive because we would swap out this 25.2 with this $28.3 million option here. We would ideally add ozone to this option as well, but right now we're kind of going back and forth on how that could occur. Polymeric membranes do not like ozone, and we don't want to ozone after filtration because it could have some less desirable effects on the distribution system. So we would want to have to potentially look at like possibly ceramic membranes or some other option. But initially we would do just polymeric with pretreatment, potentially look at GAC pressure vessels, which is granulated activated carbon. Those we would try to stay away from if we could because they require constant replenishment. Granulated activated carbon works for a couple of years, 3, 4, 5, and then you have to replace it. And it would actually look like a small tank farm out there. Did I get to all of your questions, DJ?
Yeah, you sure did. Little comment with those questions is I think it's wise to entertain those as a whole, especially considering the solutions that you've provided, the potential solutions about the low interest and the grants. A couple questions I had about those, speaking of which. So the brick, so that is competitive pot of money.
Yep.
That is application and need-based, is that correct?
It is, and all the applicants are scored based on criteria within the application packet. And again, ours is going to score really highly, but it depends on how many other projects are out there. So as it's a federally competitive, we flew past the state level. Our application was that good. So that was like, okay, you are now invited to the federal level. You now have 50 states that are competing for those same dollars. It's going to be a little bit more competitive, but I think that our application and our story is very compelling. We have a great team, which Stantec has been helping us with to craft the very best message that we can. So we think that we have a pretty good application, but there are no guarantees.
Very good. So let's keep our fingers crossed about that.
Yes.
One more question I had for the Infrastructure Investments and Job Act.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a different program. This isn't a competitive application process. This is essentially a lump sum of money that the government's willing to loan municipalities for infrastructure investment. Is that correct?
Well,
so this is something we can presume more or less that we can rely on that.
Yes and no. So I'm going to qualify that by saying the money is administered through the state of Oregon through the Safe Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund. It is far more certain. What may not be guaranteed is the amount that they're willing to loan us. So it may not be the full amount that we would ask for. That's why we want to get into the queue now and start those discussions with them, because if we have a project that is really ready to go, we are far more likely to get more funding than if we're still in the design phase. So we want to get in there early. If it turns out that they cannot give us the full amount, we'll come back with a revised that we can get 1% for this amount over here and 3% over here, or some other solution.
Very good. Thanks again for the thorough presentation, and that's all the questions I have for now.
Thank you.
Valerie, then Rick, then Joel.
Yeah, I just want to add, in my work with the transportation and the money coming down from the infrastructure, that as long as they've taken to come up with a plan, they're going to expect and they're going to have that money available right now. And so that's what the same thing they've said to us is they're going for plants or for whatever that is ready to run, because they have to spend a certain amount of it in the first year. So those people who are lined up and ready to go, so that's great that we've got you on our team to get that and push that through, because I do think that's really important, because a lot of people aren't to that level yet. So that's great. My questions go back to the difference between I want you to go back to the drawing where you have all those dotted lines. I just want to a little bit more explanation as to the use of the site. And I'm not exactly sure, are those basins, the yellow up there, is that what I'm looking at?
Yeah, so the yellow basins this is actually reversed too, so this is to the south of the site, are actually solids drying beds. So one of the things that staff were really kind of adamant about was trying to avoid a mechanical dewatering process for the solids. While we could get that into a smaller footprint, it is mechanically intensive, it takes more chemicals, it takes more operator intervention. These are solids drying beds similar that you would see over at the wastewater plant in Medford, where you put it in with a little bit of coagulant, you work it just a little bit, but it just lays in there. It's kind of like a geobag without the bag. So it's technology that's very passive. The water then evaporates. That's why you have 3 very large basins. There's actually 3 of them. You can't see the one that's been cut off there.
You can see it on mine.
Oh, gotcha. And it is a much more passive, cheaper for us to operate option for the long term. And because we don't have to expand the plant for 20 or 30 years or more, that gives us 30 years of very inexpensive operation versus higher intensive mechanical operation.
So my question is that where all the lines are, what does that represent
Right here?
Yes.
So when we have to double the plant capacity from 22 to 45 MGD, that will get built right here over the top of this area, and we'll take out all of those ponds as a result of that. At that same time, we will then build a mechanical dewatering system to replace them. But in the meantime, we've gotten the benefit of 30 plus years of very cheap technology.
Okay, that helps explain it. So that's the mechanical part that you say in a lot of ways you don't want to do, but you realize that you would have to do it as we grew population-wise.
As we continue to grow and we have to add more to the treatment plant, absolutely, we'll have to take out the passive ponds and replace it. And what you're basically doing is taking this system right here, doubling it, and plopping a second one down right here.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that explanation.
Yep.
Rick?
Thank you, Jason. When you apply for the federal grants, let's say it's $50 million, Do you increase your success rate if you reduce that amount? Let's say we only want 40 or 30, and can they award less than the 50?
So I don't think to the first one, yes or no. That's why we decided to ask for the very most. They are not really sensitive to how much you ask for because they're going to come back and negotiate with you anyway. There will be parts of our project. So as an example, every bit of the capacity from 20 to 22 and a half would not be eligible to be paid by the BRIC grant. Because it is for the existing, making your existing infrastructure more resilient or replacing your existing infrastructure in a new location where it is not prone to flooding. But it is dollar for dollar. So it's 20 MGD, which is our current capacity at the old location, to 20 MGD at the new capacity.
Okay. And then on your ponds, in that diagram there, you mentioned it may be possible to do pre-treatment ponds off-site. Would that be true also for after treatment?
For the solids, it is a potential. One of the things we actually talked about was the mill pond location where we are currently doing solids, maybe going back and putting sediment ponds there in the future. Right now, that's probably more cost than we would like to because having to work on the pond location is going to be challenging at best with being an old mill pond.
And last question, on that design there, you say when the treatment plant gets expanded, then you would look at a mechanical system because you don't have the ponds available. But is there an option that those ponds could be, as other properties in the immediate area became available 20, 30, or 40 years from now, to actually expand or move the ponds to a budding property?
That also is a very great question, and the answer is yes. And hopefully we would be in a position were any of the immediately adjacent properties to come up for sale in the future, that we were able to put in a competitive bid for those.
Okay, thank you.
Joel?
Jason, I sure appreciate the, some of the answers that you have, and hopefully they pan out. My question was, we got a family tree farm and we've been putting in some infrastructures in that, and our costs of materials have increased 100% in the last 6 months. And so you talk about, and that may be some supply chain issues, it may be some inflation, or probably both. So I would anticipate this is not a hard number that you're giving us for the final cost of this water treatment plant, and that it may go up even more.
Steve, do you maybe want to speak to that a little bit? I'm going to give you a short answer, and this is some of the stuff that we've been talking about, and I know that he can speak to it a lot more clearly. We have some contingency built into these numbers to account for that, because we know that there's still going to be inflation in there. But we were so unsure that we're actually going to hit that number that we were concerned, and so it may be higher. Some of the things that we're going to want to do to ensure that the number that we finally do give you is accurate is we want to get moving sooner than later because that's going to help. The other thing we want to do is by the time we're in there, we might want to do some early work packages or some early procurement packages where we're purchasing equipment, goods, or services. That way we can nail those costs down sooner than later. That helps us to predict those later costs a little bit early on. But the market is going to continue to increase, we think. We also believe that with the amount of money that the Infrastructure Act is going to flood across the entire country, that may contribute to higher construction inflation costs, because a lot of us are going to be vying for a lot of the same materials at the same time. This is why, again, being at the front of the queue is very, very important, I think, for us on this project. And then, Steve, maybe you could speak to that, his question, just a little bit more. Right there.
Is this mic on?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, we looked at, I gave Jason some of that escalation information, and 23% since 2015, but actually 8% of that was in last year. So it's gonna go like that, and then last year it's going like that.
Yeah.
We're hoping it goes like that or that, but we don't know. So that's a big unknown. Yeah, the whole, we call phase one process takes roughly 20 months or so. And through that, there's a lot of decisions to be made. There's a lot of things we don't even know about at this point, more geotechnical information, external factors that could play into this. So, but we have to come up with some type of target numbers, and we do conceptual designs, conceptual estimates, which inherently there's a lot of unknowns, and so there's a range of values that you'd expect that after 20 months we make these decisions, we discover all this additional information, and that goes into that final guaranteed maximum price. So you're right. I mean, that's why the contingency is important, because there are some things we can control, decisions we make throughout the design process, but there's a lot of things we can't control. And so, we would need to, it's probably best to figure out a band of values going through, and we try to stay within that band. Now that band is wide, and as the design gets closer and closer, it narrows up until we come to a point, and that's the GMP. Is that helpful?
Which was why we are in front of you today, because with that band, knowing that it's wide, but it could be higher or lower, and higher didn't fit the budget, was why we're here talking to you today.
Thank you.
Rick?
So Jason, the list you have in front of us right now is basically all your hard costs for construction?
Design and construction.
The which?
Design and construction.
Okay. So if we want to look out in the future, 10 and 20 years out, and look at operating costs to include personnel and the different membranes or whatever system we choose, what are those costs look like?
So when we come back to you, if I'm kind of hearing correctly, it sounds like you're interested in pursuing more money and two fleshed out options. They will have those numbers, operations costs, both today and in the future, because that's part of that initial analysis that we were going to do for you. And we'll be able to let you know. I can tell you right now, as you look at those sheets, I'm not sure if it was on there or not, there's a column that says operating costs. Those are relative costs to each other. And what that means is that there's a lot of more cost than just that to operate that facility. That number is just a relative number that says membranes are more expensive to operate than a conventional treatment plant. But it's not the whole picture. Because the other piece about that is membranes, if I'm running them, I can probably run them unstaffed, say 12 hours a day. Conventional treatment plant, I cannot run unstaffed. I need people there to run that plant. So that has an inherent higher manpower cost that we have not factored into those numbers.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
Yeah, I've got one.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Jason. I kind of took notes as you went, so I'm just going to go by slide. So on slide 6.
Oops, sorry.
On that first bullet, you have the per day peak capacity and then the firm capacity.
Yeah.
When you were talking about that, you were talking about what those mean, and if there's a specific piece of equipment that has a failure, we would still be able to run at or close to that 20. What's an example of something that would happen?
Influent pumps. That's one, influent and effluent pumps are where primarily your firm capacity is going to be set. So what that means is right now we have a 20 million gallon per day plant, but it is not a 20 million gallon per day firm treatment plant. It is really a 15 million gallon per day treatment plant, because if one of my pumps is down for service, which is very common, one of Adam's pumps, sorry, that's a slip from my treatment plant days, sorry about that, Adam, then we only can produce 15 million gallons per day. And so you really want to look at where does that capacity fall into what your plants, the flows that we are doing. I also talked about that, why that 10 million gallons per day firm is important. So right now, with the size of our current clear well and getting all the disinfection, your treatment plant capacity in the wintertime is only 6 MGD at the most. At the most. It's important that we increase that so that we're able to produce that water you need in the wintertime in a shorter period of time, because shorter period of time means less staffing, and I'm not running 2 shifts.
Okay, great. And then that leads into my next question is, on these appendices that we were handed out, on the first page, it shows some of the design conditions.
Yep.
And for the conventional option, it shows a firm winter capacity of 16 million. And for the membrane, it shows it's only 8, so it's 50%.
Yep.
Is that 8 a concern as far as future needs decades down the road?
It's not, and the reason is that is that wintertime capacity, and so our flows are going to be much, much, much lower. And by having a lower wintertime capacity, our current flow rate is 3 to 3.5 in the wintertime. To get to 8 in the wintertime, we are decades away from that. And so having that 8 gives us a lot of flexibility in the winter.
Okay, great. And then on the next slide, the one with the graphs.
Yes.
So I understand the difference between those, and I see on the peak day, we're going to hit capacity, you know, depending on how you measure it, either around 2041 or 2047.
Yes.
But as far as for the peak week, it looks like it's probably closer out to 2060, 2065. It's not even on there.
Yeah, I didn't run it out that far. It is probably out at 2065.
So my question is what strategies do you employ to, when you're running over peak day capacity, do you just run your reservoirs down? Is that how you do it?
So that's exactly what you do. You'll look at days where when you can't meet peak, you might lose ground in the reservoirs, but the next day you're going to make that all up. Almost every time, we operate a little bit weird because we operate start-stop. If we can operate 24 hours a day, your peak day and your peak week number are going to look much more similar. But because we operate start-stop our shoulder seasons, which are that spring and fall, where we're starting up and shutting down, and we have to run much, much faster, that's when they occur. So they're not a real demand. They're the fact that the reservoirs have drained down very, very low, and we needed to fill them up, so we had to run very fast to get there. So bottom line, what we would do, we would manage the reservoir levels, and we would watch that to where you might lose ground for a couple of days, but you still have, you know, enough capacity.
Okay, great. So on slide 13, the one that has kind of the breakdown of the costs. So this one and the next one, I know there's been some questions asked on these already, and I'm just wondering, there's a lot of things, you know, that you've already mentioned that are potentially likely being left off, the ozone. You know, and some of these things I don't know enough about to know how important they are. You know, pre-sedimentation's not included, activated carbon's not included, the mechanical dewatering is not included, gravity thickener is not included. I don't know how important those are to, you know, compared to what we have now at our current plant. Does our current plant have any of these things? Are we going, you know, I don't know. I'm just wanting clarification.
So what is included here is almost a carbon copy of the plant that we have, with a couple of additions that are very nice. One is the solids handling basins, as opposed to if you see it right here, it's an option. Geobag pads, we included it as a priced option. We can continue to do exactly what we're doing today, which is putting in that pad and continuing to fill bags and drain them and cut them open and scoop them out. What we've included is essentially what we have today. So this is almost a carbon copy. Now, it is not a gorgeous white building with a terracotta roof. It is a steel frame building. It is pretty plain concrete, tanks, very, very minimalistic. What we would look to add, as I said, would primarily be just ozone on this particular one. Powdered activated carbon is very effective with taste and odor, but because you're adding ozone, you probably don't need to do both. If we were doing membrane options, likely the add would probably either be GAC or ozone, one of the two again. The reason ozone is more beneficial is because it gives you multiple bonuses. One is it is a very, very strong oxidant and disinfectant, but it also is very beneficial on breaking down organic constituents, hence the disinfection. But things like algal toxins are destroyed, or most are destroyed by ozone, whereas no other technology can do that. So there's a lot of reasons that we would want to consider that.
Okay, great. Well, I can let someone else go.
Well, Joel has already gone before. Do you have several questions or?
I'm about halfway through, but,
Okay.
okay. On slide 15.
Yep.
So here it talks about the rate structure that council adopted in 2018, and that second bullet under that point says that it allows for $2 million per year in capital improvements, and then the sub-bullet says that's less than half of the amount needed to support the currently adopted distribution system master plan. That concerns me. That needs to be addressed. You went over it really quickly.
I did.
And so I
Yeah.
feel like that needs to be discussed more, and I don't know what you think about that, Jason, but.
I would love to make a presentation to you folks again. When we went through the rate process, and Valerie, you were there, we went through multiple iterations. We looked at fully funding the master plan. We are not replacing our infrastructure, underground infrastructure, at a rate that is likely sustainable. We are not the only ones. Every city, every county in the United States, we can't afford to replace our infrastructure at the need that is there. We are replacing about, I want to say 0.4% of 1%. So what we need to be doing is 1% per year, because that's saying that pipe that you put in the ground is going to last 100 years. That doesn't count expansion, that doesn't count building new reservoir storage or new pump stations. That's strictly replacing 1% of your pipe underground every year, and that number is close to $4.5 million per year. And that, we could not sustain that with the rate structure that we have. So that is why we picked a number that we felt was very sustainable for the community and allows us to at least make really good inroads into that, and we do as much as we can.
Sure. I would argue that number is not sustainable from a practicality standpoint. Maybe it's sustainable financially, but if we're not replacing the pipes in the ground, then it's going to come back to bite us later, just like it's come back to bite us with our facilities. So I think that needs to be addressed soon.
Well, I will just, in answer to that, I don't disagree with you, but you have to remember, before this time, we didn't have any master plans. So we've been like floating, most municipalities and whatever, we've been floating for years with absolutely no master plans, throwing a dart at what needs to happen. So the fact that we put together master plans is incredible in itself. It's kind of like now doing our asset management plan. We recognize we have to do it, but you can't just automatically have the money to do it all. So, in defense, we've come a long way just by establishing those. It's just, we realize, well, wouldn't it have been nice to have this 25, 30 years ago when we started? And to come middle of the road and do it is financially difficult. So we have them, and that's really exciting. There was a lot of work that went into those. It's been an amazing growth to see it, but you also saw what we went through last year with $1.5 million budget cuts. So that's the reality.
Okay, on slide 19.
Yep.
It's talking about the BRIC grant.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it's one more slide, maybe.
Sorry.
Yeah, on this one, regarding that first bullet that talks about the water treatment plant in the 100-year floodplain.
500, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, 500.
Yeah, I caught that. Is that still applicable for BRIC grant if it's in the 500 compared to 100?
Yeah, if it's in any of the flood zones as defined by FEMA, it qualifies.
Okay.
Sorry, 500 year. I even said 500 years later when I spoke about it, but I wrote 100.
That's all good. On slide 22 and 23, you could just go to 22 or 23. It's, I wasn't totally sure what to make of these slides because I know what it's saying. Like, this is what our kind of original plan was with the 56 million at 3.5%, and over time the total payments are going to be 91 million.
Correct.
So the second one, where it's talking about a term amount or an issue amount of 76 million and 1%, I see that the total payments is less with interest over the amount of time.
Yeah.
but is kind of the more subtle thing saying that we might need 20 million more dollars to build this plant than we were originally planning?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's kind of the not so subtle. I'm recommending that we pursue up to $76 million in safe drinking water loan funds. That will not impact the rate structure at all. In fact, there'll be a little bit less debt service payment per year. That at least gives us a couple of options to come back with you to. And then at that time, if you say, no, we still can't afford those, stick with the 56.1 or some other number, we'll then fit a plant into that number and borrow it at the lowest possible interest rate that we can.
Okay. And then my last question, thank you everyone for bearing with me here. On slide 24, it just goes further into this. That sub-bullet is, if 56 million is not available, borrow the maximum amount available and issue bonds on the remaining portion.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with what issuing bonds means. Could you just briefly explain that?
Boy, where's Adam when you need him? So we as a enterprise fund are able to issue bonds based on the amount of revenues that we receive. So they're revenue bonds, they're not general obligation bonds, which is what we did on the wastewater plant. It's essentially borrowing money, but you're actually buying bonds in Grants Pass, essentially, and we're able to get those at fairly competitive rates, but our bond agent is telling us we probably want to figure about 3.5% right now. She thinks we can get lower, but to be conservative, she is telling us about 3.5%.
Okay. I had one other question, and it was about the estimates and what class they are. I know when we talked earlier this year, they were class 5 estimates. Are they still class 5?
I want to say they are, but I cannot answer that. And of course, Wayne stepped out, unfortunately. Do you remember if it's a 4 or a 5?
Well, it's a 4 now.
Come up to the mic, please.
We're calling it a 4 now, but there's actually with AACE, which is the guide we use, of class 4 and 5 overlap in terms of variance, but it's a little tighter than the last go around.
Okay. All right, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Joel, did you still have a question?
I just had two quick ones, Jason. Tell me if this is correct or not. If we get the $50,000 grant and we get the $26,000 in loans in, or we pay off 50,000 of the 50 million of the 76 million, that would allow us then to go back and look at the annual capital investment, and it would actually solve the problem and lower our rates. Am I correct in that assumption?
I would think if you were awarded a $50 million grant, you could do all of those things. You could increase the amount of money that you were spending on your capital program and reduce your user rates.
Yeah, that's the best outcome, and the worst outcome is we're right where we're at right now.
Correct.
Okay,
which
so
is not bad.
The other thing is, and you don't need to answer this, just ask you to consider it, but doing integration with our previous topic and this topic, and drawdown. And during high fire danger or whatever, that our drawdown be at a rate that still would be able to fight fires or anticipate the water use, everybody trying to irrigate their roofs and lawns, that you would consider that if that's an issue. So that our drawdown rate would anticipate during high fire danger and those emergencies that we have.
So
you don't have to answer.
I'm not going to answer, but I am going to give you just a brief. Every time we design a storage tank, it has a component that is emergency water only. Then it has an operational storage component and then a normal usage component. And so we do consider all of that, including treatment plant capacity. So yes.
Valerie?
Yes, my question now comes down to timeline. So what are we talking about when we're talking about finding out when these are available, so we know?
That is an awesome question. So the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, we have to submit a letter of interest to the state, which is basically just a short form that talks about the program. After that, if they are interested, there's a more detailed application process. We could know on that as soon as February. The brick grant, we should know, I want to say it was a little bit later in the spring, if not early summer, potentially as late as August. So we would want to get in the queue for the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund. And then hopefully in late summer, we have brilliant news for you all and, and everything comes up roses and rainbows.
Rick?
Jason, I may be continuing what Joel was talking about on the reserve capacity and the reservoirs for fire, but focusing on the reservoirs and the capacity needed today or in the future.
Yeah.
If we added in more reservoirs, would we have a better return on our investment by being able to hold back adding to the plant?
Yeah, that's a question that we always battle. And if you remember the Eisenhart report, and I know that you were here during that time, that's one of the things that they recommended us to look at. One of the things that we do battle in our system is water age. Especially by the time that you get out to the far extents of the system. So the more storage you get, yes, you have more operational storage and you can make a smaller treatment plant, but then by the time the water makes it through those reservoirs to the end of the system, it's really, really old, which can also have issues. And so we want to balance that very carefully. So we do always evaluate that. Right now, we're really, really good on storage in our low level. Where we need to concentrate on is that next level, zone 2 and 3 right now, are where we're deficient.
Brian?
I really hope we get some of these monies falling from the
Yep.
sky, otherwise we're going to be in a tough spot.
Yes.
So I just did a little quick calculation. If we have to use that $76 million number and we have to do it at 3.5% over,
Yeah.
instead of $91 million, it's $122 million. And I want us to be ready for the worst case scenario because it is within the realm of possibility. So I just don't want anyone to get too rosy on that.
Not yet.
But yeah, I really hope that one of these other options comes through.
We're working on Plan Z as well to find more very, very low interest money. If not that, Susan and her team down in finance are continuing to look for additional grant opportunities. So we'll keep you posted.
All right, thank you for your work on this.
Thank you, guys.
Are there any other questions? Counselors on the phone, do you have any questions? Guess not. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
All right. Did you want to discuss this at all? I think staff would like some direction at least in whether we're interested in allowing them to pursue the grant and loan options.
I think we'd be stupid not to.
Somebody on the phone, could you please mute yourself unless you're talking? Oh, okay. Did you unmute yourself to speak, somebody on the phone? Okay. Did he mute again, Julie? No, I can't hear it anymore. Okay. Just don't want to cut somebody off if they're trying to talk to us. Okay. Valerie.
Well, I think it's basically a no-brainer to say we need to go forward, first of all, with the loan application and then wait and say our prayers nightly about the rainbows. And yes, I'm going for the rainbows. So yeah, I think we have to do that, everything we can to try to bring it down. Because as we know, I mean, the price of everything's gone up. It's crazy out there right now. So yeah, I think we have a good crew trying to help us cut costs, and that's what we need to keep doing.
Brian, then DJ.
Yeah, I agree with Valerie. We absolutely need to go after that money. The question is, and I guess I should have asked this sooner, is between now and the time finding out whether we're going to get those or not, do we know how much money we're planning on spending in that amount of time, as far as, I think you said late summer. So what's the estimate between now and late summer for costs?
I don't have an exact number. I think we'll probably be on the order of a couple $1 million more. What we'll do is we will finish the cost estimating of the development of the two alternatives. That's kind of baked into option 1A. Will be in front of you probably now later. We were hoping in January, but now it might push into a little bit of February to issue that 1B, which will be the start of the design work in February. That is going to be probably on the order of $5 to $6 million in full design costs, maybe a little bit more, depending on what option gets chosen. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
DJ?
Yeah, thank you. I'm inclined to align with staff's recommendation, both on the value and pursuing both funding options. I tend to also err on the side of best case scenario. I've heard a couple times mentioned, best case, worst case scenario. I would like to focus on as well all things considered best case scenario, meaning I think it's wise to be mindful about the increased cost of quality and future regulations. That 1%, that's cheap money that we can borrow now. I think that we need to be mindful about that good or best case scenario and seriously consider the cost implications of adding those quality measures. So I would expect at this point when the presentation comes before us again, when we know a little bit more about the availability of the loans and the BRIC, that staff comes back with some realistic numbers and capabilities of some clever financing options to add those quality features for future regulations. So that's my input. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Joel?
Well, I don't see if anybody disagrees, I would ask them to speak up and that'd be okay, just so that we know. The other thing is that we need to proceed in a timely manner because time is money, especially in this. And if we can accelerate the development, even if it does cost a little more the next 6 months or a year or whatever, even in the unknown, it's going to save us money in the long term, given the environment in which we're working with that infrastructure money coming down from the federal government. So, so I would encourage us to proceed as if we know what we're doing.
Brian?
I just want to make clear for Jason, I think this is probably going to be discussed next time, but when we have the next discussion, to make sure we have the breakdown of potential energy use and staffing costs, so we have a full picture of all of the ongoing costs at the facility.
All right, well, I believe the council is in support of pursuing our various options with both the grant and loan and two different technology choices there. All right. Next up, agenda review. Thanks, Jason, for the presentation and for our consultants for being here as well. Joel.
I have one item that is important and it's not that, well, it is significant, but it's not a major expense item or anything, and that's the Parks Committee talked about renaming one of our parks in favor of, to honor one of our participants that had been on the Parks Committee for a long time, and the soccer field at All Sports Park with Dick, and I'd like us to put that on the agenda so that we can pass that and rename that. They've already filled out the proper forms and they've given it to staff, and all we need to do is just recognize their work and move ahead. That's stigmata. Yeah.
Okay, that's something that they made a motion about, but it's...
I think what they did was they filled out some paperwork and gave it to staff. And Brad, you may know more than I do.
Yeah, no, the councilor's right. The policy for naming parks facilities was one that the council adopted just I don't know, several months ago, and it does say that if you're going to, put a plaque or something else that recognizes an individual, that the council have the final review of what that plaque is and exactly where it's going to go. So that's pretty much ready. I think we've got a couple more bids on just the amount of the plaque. We wanted to have that for you, but if you put it on within the next month, we'll be ready for that.
Okay, so that's already in the process. They're following the application process for that. Okay.
I just have a quick question on that, because I do remember that and what we approved, and the part that I was unclear of, and maybe since they're filling it out, and it'll be great to know, is they talked about having to have a plan for the ongoing maintenance or whatever. Is that something that has to be there? Or that's the part I didn't completely understand in that process.
Are you asking if there's a plan for the ongoing maintenance of the sign?
Yes, of the sign. Is that? I just remember that being there, and so that's the part I was unclear of, whether it's whoever is doing it because needs to address that or not.
Yeah, I am not remembering that particular piece, but we will definitely look at the policy and make sure that we cover it in your staff report. Yeah.
Okay, so normally we start by reviewing the meetings that are upcoming, and we have a meeting this Wednesday evening. Both the council president and myself are not able to attend, and so we have asked Joel to lead the meeting. We will start that meeting off with a couple of public hearings. There's one regarding reviewing the Community Development Block Grant Program Year 2020 Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report. A brief one regarding a property line vacation. And then for council action items, you have an RFP award for the Southwest Ramsey Affordable Housing Project, a resolution that would form the Caveman Plaza Task Force, a resolution approving the HB 2006 application, a resolution approving the city manager's evaluation. And then under consent calendar, we have a start item for the resolution that would update the comprehensive fee schedule, a resolution for the ESRI software renewal, and a resolution settlement in the National Prescription Opiate Litigation Lawsuit. Any questions on any of that, Valerie?
I don't really have a question, and I am the one who asked for the star on the resolution updating the comprehensive fee schedule. I read through it in the packet, and I just want to make sure that that the policy stated as to how you choose what it goes up by, because it just has the new one in there. It doesn't have, so I can't, by looking at that, tell what it was as opposed to what it's going to be. So just a brief explanation of how those numbers are reached, I think, is basically what I was asking for.
Okay.
Is that clear, Jason?
So to explain the change.
Or whoever's doing the finance, I don't know who's doing it.
It'll be Adam or myself that'll be doing that
Okay,
presentation.
okay, but I just wanted to clarify what I was asking for.
With regards to the
Yes.
procurement levels and how it's
Yes.
changed is what
Yes.
you'd like to
Yes.
identify. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and then that would be our final meeting of the year.
Sir, I have a question on that one, sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, on the affordable housing RFP, I noticed in the packet that there is an applicant that is recommended by staff, and I was just wondering if we knew if that applicant was going to be here in attendance that evening to answer questions. We don't know.
We have not informed them or asked them to be here. We could get a hold of them if that's required. We can certainly do that. At this point, it was just an action to acknowledge the award and whether or not that is in fact going to be the case. But we can have somebody here.
Okay, I'm happy to float my questions to you first, and if they need to be here, then that can be at your discretion, but I'll do that. Thank you.
All right, any other questions about Wednesday? Joel?
Well, one of the things I'm used to in advertising and awarding things is the packet has to be all-inclusive, and if you gather additional information from one bidder, the other bidders then can appeal the decision. So I think we need to be careful there so that we don't jeopardize our award. At least that's what I've been associated with in the past. I don't know if the city has that same issue or not. Mark, you may know.
So you're talking about if that particular bidder is here? Is that what your question is?
Yeah, if we're soliciting bids and then we just have one bidder here and we ask them specific questions that the other bidders don't have a chance to respond to?
Well, it's closed, so it's an acknowledgement. So I understand your concern. I don't see it as such.
Aaron.
Yeah, I just wanted to, with the mayor and council president gone on Wednesday, the resolution approving the city manager evaluation was moved from consent to council action. Is there anything specific council's looking for information for discussion on that meeting that we can bring forward to you?
I think, Rob, did you want to explain?
I requested some information last week from Diana, received that, and I did want to discuss that, but I don't think I need any further data or information from staff. Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, DJ?
Yeah, going back to the previous topic about having a respondent to the RFP, Joel, I think that is whereas it might not be a conflicting concern legally, that would be a great concern of mine, to have sort of an unequal opportunity amongst the respondents. And I think it's my opinion that should be an all or nothing situation. I think we could welcome input or anything else that the respondents have to say and add it to the meeting, but I think it's improper to have one respondent there when the other one's not. So I wouldn't be comfortable doing that unless it was all of them, or at least having the opportunity for all of them to be there, you know, save for if one of them didn't want to be there or couldn't be there. So I think we need to be really mindful about treading into that territory. So the other input I had was about Wednesday night. I'll be on holiday, but it's my intention to join the Wednesday meeting remotely. So I'll be present for that meeting. No worries, I just wanted to throw it in there. So anybody else have any concern about either of those? Willing to listen.
All right, thanks. Yeah, we're not able to run the meeting remotely, so Joel will be running it here, but DJ will be present. Brian?
Yeah, I wasn't mentioning anything along the lines of assisting in running the meeting. I understand that, but I will be present.
Yep. Brian?
Well, it sounds like to allay Joel and DJ's concerns, we could just invite all three and then of the RFP applicants, and then if they show up, great, and if they don't, then that's their choice. Is that the best way to handle it? Yeah, okay.
I think that's satisfactory.
Okay.
Okay, Mark was nodding yes as well. So I guess unless there's any objections, we'll entertain inviting all three applicants. I'm seeing heads nod. Okay, are we done with Wednesday? Okay, so that is our last meeting for the year, and then we have our first workshop of the year is January 3rd, where we'll have the Caveman Pool funding options, results of the G Street survey, and water system risk and resilience study. Valerie.
Yes, I have a question on the G Street survey results, because I know there was two things that we were asking downtown merchants that have been on. Number one was the traffic about the closing of G Street. That was one question we had, but we've also been talking about the parklets, and that's a whole nother issue. And I don't know where that is or whether that's addressed at the same time, or because I know that if we're going to do something, this is the time to talk about it, not to put it off and wait till next spring. So I'm just curious as to where, if those will both be included there or if only one of them. So let me know.
Sure. So we only went with a 4-block radius on the G Street survey. So we took G Street between 4th and 6th and then built a 4-block radius around that. That is who received the G Street survey. We did have a very good response rate on it. There was a lot of information, but the parklet piece was not included in that because it was a fairly tight radius. And at least staff's understanding was that council was wanting a little bit broader input for the parklet, not only, you know, that particular block section. So we do have it largely drafted, and we will be talking here very soon about, you know, exactly who gets that parklet survey, and we'll get council a draft of that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and we will get wider downtown discussions on the agenda. We've been waiting for that survey. So going forward, I guess anything that you see here that you want to add? We have a couple meetings coming up before strategic planning, and then of course strategic planning at the end of January, and then we'll have a whole new perspective, right, on getting things on the agenda for next year. So anything pressing that's missing, Valerie?
Yeah, where are we on our ARPA funding? I mean, making decisions and that sort of thing. Is that going to be part of our strategic planning? Is there going to be a special workshop on it? Where are we? Because it's just kind of, we went through the survey and then we just kind of like dropped it. So I'm curious as to the direction.
Yeah, that would be ultimately, as a policy board, we're looking for future direction from council on where you'd like to go and how quickly you'd like to proceed with regards to the distribution of those resources. And so having potentially another workshop would be maybe a good step on if you're wanting to look at actually distribution or your method of distribution or additional information before you distribute. We do have, when we get to that point, when council's looking at having another discussion on it, staff will bring forward also some proposed potential items that we could utilize ARPA dollars for internally that we would like council to also consider.
I guess my question is I kind of feel, I know that there's some time. When do we have to have the plan? I know that, yeah, so what are our timelines? I just want to be reminded of those.
Well, really, there isn't a real timeline of what you spend with your first allocation versus your second allocation. The real timeline is that into December 2024 of having at least all the funds identified for distribution. So it really is at the pace of council and where you'd like to go. Some communities have gone out the gate immediately with the sprint, and here you go, it's done. Some communities are taking their time and trying to determine the allocation of the resources. We just have to make sure that we're aware that we have that almost $4 million, and we do need to try to have it allocated. You've already identified a couple of allocations, like the water treatment plant for $3 million, potential urban campground at around $1.2 million. So taking the remaining and trying to identify where you might have those go. You've got until December 2024, but it's at your pace up into that date.
Okay, thank you. I just know that if we're going to put it in a few areas, it'd be nice to know sooner than later and get some information to back that. So I would like to see it on along with the staff's proposals on what they see coming forth as soon as possible.
All right, thank you. It will be, this is not a thing where we have 10 days, but yeah, we have a little bit of time. Did anybody else have something? I was going to have a question about the urban campground update, which I see is on January 24th, and we have a memo here today about how the roundtable went, but is there a particular reason why that's on the 24th, or what's the plan there?
Yeah, that was just a holding point, and if council, knowing that anticipating that. You can move that around or have it whenever you'd like. We just knew that there'd likely be a further discussion based on the memo that you have there, and that could be changed, removed, or deleted, Mayor, based on wherever council would like to go with that.
Okay, that one just does seem to be quite a ways off. I didn't know if there was a reason why we couldn't have it earlier.
We can definitely have it earlier. When I was away from the office, I just asked that it be put on the agenda somewhere, and so that was just, that's where it was placed.
Okay.
There was no rhyme or reason for it, and as I mentioned before, Mayor, you and council can put that wherever you like, and we're prepared to have whatever information for council so you can have an informed discussion.
Okay, thank you.
I just had a quick question on that, as I do know that I had heard that they were putting together based upon the criteria that was kind of set out, the 3.5 acres, that there was, the GIS was in the process of looking up for those pieces of land. Would that come to us first, or does that go to ACCF, the foundation?
No,
So how does it?
that's a great question, Counselor. So in your memo that you have today, you haven't had a chance to take a look at it. It does have the map based on the criteria, and it's 2.5 acres is the piece. But what we've done in that memo is we've identified based on the criteria associated with the round table, putting those into place. We have mapped out the exact properties that fit that criteria for your consideration.
Okay. All right, thank you. And I guess that brings me to the one other piece that I think we need to talk, which is also on the dais today, is about the executive session to talk about the Dollar Mountain property and make a plan to come up with a plan. So I think that's something else we need to look at putting on the agenda.
Thank you, and I know DJ was wanting that as well. DJ, you have your hand up?
Yeah, that's essentially what I would like to bring up in response to the county removing that property from the auction, motivated by, council's interest in the property. I think that it's wise to take the next step and go into executive session on real estate negotiations. And furthermore, we need to understand that they've made it clear that if we don't come to satisfactory negotiations, that it will be the Board of Commissioners' intention to put that up on the next sheriff's auction that I believe is happening in April. So I think it's timely, considering that there's kind of a lot of work to do to come to satisfactory terms with the Board of Commissioners on that property.
All right, Aaron, did you have something?
No, my only comment was that we could accommodate council's discussion of that in executive session if that's where you'd like to go with that at any time. So we'd be prepared at your direction.
Okay, thanks. And Brian?
Yeah, I just had one more question about the next time we have the urban campground workshop. As part of this memo, there was additional contract language that was suggested, and I was wondering if it's our understanding that those suggestions are going to be worked into some sort of revised contract that we can review and work with.
So once I get, if that's council's direction and that's what they desire after they've reviewed the recommendations, if they'd like to take that in its entirety and build it into a contract, Mark and I would be more than happy to have a contract established based on council's direction.
Okay, well, I guess we have those revisions here in the memo, so we can all review them, and then I can bring it up at another agenda setting.
Okay. Anything further for now? All right, we do have an executive session scheduled today, so is there a motion to adjourn into executive session? Valerie?
I make a motion we adjourn to executive session.
Second from Brian, thank you. All in favor of adjourning into executive session?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the council will now meet in executive session for the purpose